Hello, Design Systems friends. How are we doing out there?
Hello, hello.
Romina, are you with us?
Yes, I'm also here
Ah,
in a secret room.
I'm so excited to be sharing the next 90 minutes of epicness with you. First of all, do you want to tell everybody your name? Because I really don't want to butcher your last name.
Well, my name is Romina and my last name is Kaučić.
And you might know Romina for making some of the most beautifully designed design tokens and design systems resources that you can find, as well as she started a new podcast or interview series where you go in deep about design systems and design tokens with all sorts of amazing people. So I'm super excited to be here with you.
Yeah, likewise, Sam. So maybe you can also share with us how is your surname called?
My
Maybe they paired us because we have such weird surnames.
my last name is Gordashko.
Ah, okay,
It's
that was easy.
Samantha Gordashko. It's a mouthful, which is why I normally go by Sam. It just feels more sitting for the kind of personality that I am. But it's so nice to meet you. I was hoping, if you don't mind, we could go through the same sort of introductory questions that I've been asking the rest of the folks today, if you don't mind.
Let's do it. But I will do the same,
Oh, it's time. Everyone's going to get to hear my answers. Okay, I'm ready. First question. You are symbolized as an emoji. What is your emoji?
Yeah, it's a panda. I love it. I love pandas and yeah.
Panda. I love that. It's funny. I asked this question because anytime I have to screen share and I pull up the emoji board and you see your last frequently used emojis, it's usually a bit of a terrifying moment. You can really tell how I've been feeling lately. It's maybe like the red face with the thing across it, or it's this one, or it's like, oh. But I think if I was an emoji, it would be this one. That would be me.
Love all over the place.
Okay. Question number two. Serious one. What is the component that you love to hate to work on?
I hate tooltips. I mean, if you have basic tooltip, everything's fine. But if you want to do some shadows and some gradients and maybe a rounded arrow that exists there perfectly, it's a mess if you want to do it automatic. Yeah.
Well, and never mind if you maybe thought you would ever have a border on that tooltip in Figma. It's just not happening.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So the component that I hate to work on is anything having to do with a table, a data table. And bless all the designers out there who love to work in data tables, because I cannot. It's each cell. It's the content within the cell that changes the cell. It's the sizing of it. It's, is it in a column or is it in a row? And then what happens if you do this and then this and then you've got to flex it? And what about responsive design? So my hack is I put sticky notes on a Figma file and say, these are the headings of the column. And then I usually mock it up in an Airtable and go, here's what it could look like. Have fun, Eng. And then they send me a React component library and they build it in 5 seconds. And I'm like, let's make the border darker. And maybe we write some tokens for that. But like, if I never have to design a data table ever again, I will be a very happy designer.
Yeah, you leave that to developers.
Leave that to them. They're way faster at it. I'm done. All right. Last question. You get to order the perfect pizza. What's the toppings?
Well, I would definitely choose pistachios, mortadella, and buffalo mozzarella.
Okay, did we say pistachio the nut, or is this like a fancy meat that I need to know about?
No, pistachios, like nuts.
The nuts on a pizza. I've never
Yeah,
had this before. Now I've like
yeah,
need
it's
to go
really
on a
crazy.
world
It's a
pizza.
great combination with buffalo mozzarella, so
Okay,
you need to try it.
I need to get my hands on some pistachios. I love that. Um, so for me, my go-to normally is pesto sauce with artichokes and chicken with like a nice buffalo mozzarella would be really nice, but usually it's whatever fancy cheese they have on the
Oh,
pesto
wow.
chicken pizza. It's the
Never
go-to.
tried that one.
I love it.
Maybe because I don't like artichokes.
That's probably a good reason why, yes. All right. Well, today, friends, Romina and I are going to go through two very different approaches on how to name your design tokens, and not just what to name them, what not to name them, if you should use this, that, or the other thing, but some practical sort of hands-on workshop things that you can actually do to do the act of naming. they're two different approaches. Romina's is very awesome and beautiful and interactive, and mine is a little bit more grassroots with hanging out in a FigJam file, but we've both got some automation tips in there that will make your lives a little bit easier. But yours is really fun. If you're like, yours is really fun. I'm
Yours
really
is
like
also fun.
moving the Post-its around the FigJam is interesting for me. But what we're going to start with first is I have done, and I'm going to try to do it in like under 10 minutes. It's a design tokens crash course. And the reason being is I would love to think that everybody is on the same level of nerdiness about design tokens as we are, but I know that that's not necessarily the case. And maybe there's somebody watching this recording a little later in life and they just would really appreciate the sort of context. So I'm going to share my screen if Zoom will let me do the thing here. Give me one
And I will join in 10 minutes.
Yeah, Romina's going to take a chill. All right. You can see my Figma. Yes. Amazing. All right. Design tokens crash course in 10 minutes or less. I can see a clock there, so I know that I'm on it. What is a design token? A design token expresses a design decision, and it's written in a common language that is platform agnostic and shareable across different disciplines, tools, and technologies. That idea of the common language talks about how we write those tokens so that they can live in a JSON file and then have them in code to share between our engineering team and anyone else who needs to consume them. And the way that we write those tokens and what it includes or doesn't include is managed by the Design Tokens community group. And they host that specification on the WC3 website and platform for the standard. So if you ever hear us talking about the spec or WC3 or WTCG or any version of that, because I will for sure mess it up, we're talking about this idea of what is like an official token type or what is the official spec on the token. The spec says that a token is a name, the type, the value, and the description. And it lives in a JSON file in code, and it becomes a source of truth that can be shared between these different tools, technologies, and platforms. And interestingly enough, the idea of a token type is a relatively new addition to what a design token should include. So basically, a design token has everything that we need to communicate our design decisions. You can look at a design token and understand the who, what, where, when, why, and how of all of your design decisions. We can take those tokens and yes, we can apply them directly to components in Figma or any other design tool technically, but we can also sync those design tokens to variables or colors, and then product designers can use those to style whatever it is that they're working on. And then we take those design tokens and we have them in code. We can sync them through different tools like GitHub, GitLab, whatever it is. And engineers can use a tool like Style Dictionary to transform the token into whatever programming language that they need. When we talk about this idea of token structure, or you might have heard it referred to as token architecture, it means the flow of information between the different design decisions that we have specified for each of the teams that might be interacting with our tokens. Now, you might have seen a really terribly designed version of this infographic that I put on Twitter, I don't know, 6 or 8 months ago now, asking people what they named the different tiers of their design decisions. And I was shocked to find out that there's 8 or 9 different versions of what you can call these top 3 or the 3 tiers in a typical structure. So at the top, most people agree that they're going to call these a primitive. Some people call them an option or a global or whatever it is. So for simplicity's sake, I refer to these as primitive or options. And in the middle, they're called semantic, but that word doesn't necessarily apply. So instead of calling it a semantic token, I call them decision tokens. And in the bottom, it's what we apply to a component. And if we write a token specific to that, it's a component specific token. So in a normal 3-tier structure, we have our primitive options, we have decisions that we make that we apply to components. Now, if we look at what a token looks like in code, we have the name, and that acts as the ID for the design decision, the value of whatever we decided, the type that the token is. Now, if I have the same value and the type, for example, was a text or a string token, it would tell the system to apply this as a string of text as opposed to apply the color. So it's pretty important. And the description is optional. You can use the description field to add some notes in there that your engineers can actually see when they consume your tokens. Now, today we're here to talk about token names. So what makes a great token name? Now, most of you are going to tell me it's semantic. However, semantic means it has meaning. And what is meaningful to me might not be meaningful to the new designer we hire in 6 months. It might be not meaningful to my product manager or anyone else on my team who isn't living in the world of pure token madness that I live in day to day. So instead, great names are simple. They're human readable. They're thoughtful. They're collaborative. Now, what do I mean by collaborative? Well, remember I told you that design tokens are supposed to be a shared source of truth between designers, engineers, stakeholders, and everyone else that is sharing your system? What if we have a name for a button that looks like this? mds.sys.sem.cont.lo. That's supposed to be the ID for design decision, but I don't really know what that means. And I live in token land forever. Is my PM going to know? Is a new designer going to know? An engineer might. Now, this is a token that I borrowed from material design. And so if you're a material design guru, you're like, I know exactly what that means. But it's not semantic to me because I haven't built in that world in a long time. So instead, what if we had names that were catered to the different people that are in our teams? So maybe as a systems designer, I know exactly what colors.gray 500 means. But people working in product design or consuming my system, they're not going to know when they should use that colors.500 token. Instead, they go, oh, brand colors, and it's the neutral palette, and it's the default version. Cool, I know what that means. It's contextual, and I understand it. My engineers, however, they need something a bit more specific. What's the component? Where does it live? What is it doing? What property does it mean? Just from looking at the name, which again is the ID of the design decision, I want to know the who, what, where, when, how, and how of everything that is within that token. Great names are also future friendly. Some people say future proof, but at the speed of which things are changing, I don't know if that's a safe way to call it. So a future friendly name means I won't need to change or replace the token. The name is going to remain technically accurate even if the decision changes. So let's talk about this idea of hierarchy, right? So I have this thing called button outlined default background color. Okay, it's the background color for a button. It's outlined, makes sense, and it's the default state. I get that. However, what if my system changes and I'm no longer using an outlined button for that second tier of what I need it to do? Well, this name no longer applies. So instead, I could use something very foolproof and future friendly, like literally tier 2, if I wanted to communicate that. Great names are scalable. I won't need to modify the token names as my system evolves over time. Now, remember that awesome name I had chosen, button tier 2 default background color. Well, we all know that your buttons are not just neutral colored unless you're working in a plugin like Token Studio for now. We usually have a neutral button, you have a brand one or an info one, you have success, you have danger, and we all know that this is not the only kind of button, but I don't need to talk about that any further because I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about. So instead, let's give a space for this idea of the intention or the appearance. So now I know that this is the button that is in the neutral styling category. It's the second tier of emphasis. It's at the default state and it's for the background color. I literally can tell from looking at the name what this token is supposed to represent. It's human readable, it's contextual, scalable, future friendly, and all the things that make a good name. So now, how do I craft a good name? There is no one right way. If it works for you, your project, and your team, it's a great approach. However, Romina and I are both going to share how we've been doing it. Romina's way is interactive and has a really awesome automation tool based on a table. And mine is in FigJam. And so I'm going to pass it off to Romina so Romina can wow you with hers. And then she's going to pass it back to me. I'll wow you with mine. And then we're going to go through and answer some questions at the end.
So hello back. As you can see, it's really easy. So let me just share my screen. Okay. So my idea of naming design tokens, it's even easier, you know. I always take my favorite theme, for example, animals, and who doesn't know the difference between lady beetle or maybe the size of the dog or size of the elephant, but that would be just 5 minutes of this workshop, so I decided to expand a bit. I mean, of course, I'm joking, and I'm Romina, and this is not a joke. I'm working in and dealing with pixels for over 18 years now, and I started doing, I mean, as I was at the internship, I was working as a designer for doing the wallpapers for feature phones. And as you can imagine, when you're designing a wallpaper, and especially for the feature phone, you can quickly see what's the impact with the users, you know, because we were selling them in the magazines. And of course, we had to know the users very well to know what to sell them. And I think it's the same in design and design systems. If you don't know for who you're doing the design system, it's very hard to do something useful for them. And I post a lot of resources about design systems on the design system guide. But when I'm not working and dealing with pixels, I love to spend time with my family in nature and with my son, and we're doing a lot of Lego stuff. But yeah, let's focus on design systems now. I mean, on design tokens. So I'm gonna lead you through some common challenges that you might encounter. We will go through some typical design token types, and then I will share the exact workflow that I use with my clients for coming to the naming stuff. But before doing so, I want to share two important things with you. So code is not design, and what users see is the code, you know, so it's really important that you use the code as the final layer for all your designers. So you should have one central repository for storing design tokens or Figma variables, whatever you want to use. So people can just pull and push the data and always know that that's the latest version of that. And the second one is time to value. I mean, it seems so obvious that you connect design system with your business, but a lot of times teams are very isolated. So that means that they are doing something just because they read a really cool blog post or they see the trend on Twitter or somewhere else. But it's important that where you focus, that you will know how fast you will come to something valuable. So that means that you will publish a new feature or something that's connected with your product or even new product. But then reality hits, you know. You come to design tokens and it's like, oh my God, this is so hard. We don't understand anything. What are the Figma variables? Token was deprecated. What to do now? Should we have a lot of tokens? Should we have two-layer tokens? Should we use component tokens? Okay, let's just use ChatGPT and it will generate the names for us. I mean, a lot of questions, as you can imagine. So the only way to come away from these problems is to collaborate. So you should have a cross-functional team, invite all your people that work for you to collaborate, to share their experience, because they know a lot of stuff that you might not, and also from their previous companies. So yeah, design tokens are design decisions, and these decisions make up your brand. So it's really important that you put the meaningful name on the value that you want to have, you know, so because this meaningful value, I mean, this meaningful name will create a common language for your team. And that's why you should use the language that your team understands. Don't use some fancy names that nobody in your team never heard of that. And less decisions, less chaos. I mean by that once you decide for some names, you don't have to come back. You will know what you decided for, and that's why it will be really easy to use. And with that, you will get improved product development. It will be easier to maintain and also way easier to scale. Your brand consistency will be way better. And yeah, you will give yourself a high five. But the problem is that when you start with the colors, people have different ideas how to name them. Some people like to add hex color codes. Some like to name them dark 1, dark 2. Some like to use some abstract naming. So yeah, but imagine doing that for all the categories that you have. So for color, font, space, size, border, I mean, it would get really crazy, and the cognitive load for your developers and designers would be, I don't even want to go there. So let's check how to, in the beginning, what are some design token types? I will hide this for now. So we have the raw value, like Sam already shared. And then if we want to come to the primitive or global or constant tokens that we have, we will just put all the things that we have in one bucket. So this is the bucket that you can take from. And you need to have some structure naming for that. For example, you will say yellow 100 to yellow 1000, but don't add too many colors or spacing options if you don't need them, because it will just get confusing. So the semantic layer, or the second layer approach, is that you would say, okay, this yellow color will be applied to color text secondary. So every time we will have a secondary text, we will use this yellow color. And as you can see, it's not very specific. It's quite general. And if you're using, if you have an app that's not so huge or complex, you will get away from it. But if you want to go further and if you want to automate things, you will need to go a level up. So you will have to create component tokens. So you will say specifically that this yellow color will be only used for color button, for the text in secondary state and when it's active. So this means that you went really specific. But then you will stop me and say, okay, but what's better, like second layer approach or third layer approach? I would say that you need to be aware of where you want to go. So for example, if you want to automate things and you want to create a plugin for that, or maybe use the API, you will need to define every detail of your component, because this is the only way to automate things. But if your team is smaller and you have less than 4 teams ready, you can use the combination of semantic naming and the component naming, because some component will be really specific and you will need more details, but other ones can be shared across your apps. But then we also know computational and adaptive. So what's the difference? With computational, you can add some logic. So for example, you can say that space, let's say that your baseline is 8 pixels, but you can actually make it bigger in some specific case. Or you can say for the t-shirt size, you just specify the base size and then you just multiply it, so you don't have to calculate or add values manually. And then we also know adaptive design tokens, and that means that you will have the ability to change the colors or spacing or whatever you will define for a specific environment or in specific use cases. So for example, I have the example here that the color on light background will be yellow, but on dark background, it will be green. Okay, and then the fun didn't end yet. We also know composite design tokens. So that means that instead of writing the values all the time and again, you will combine specific design tokens into one. So I have the examples for textile. You will combine the font size, weight, family, and line height. And this is the example. And then you could do the same for border, like border, and then input default. And you will combine the color, width, and style. And also for the gradient, you can define the start color and the end color. and the same for shadows. But these are just some basic examples. Let's continue with token scales. I added a lot of options here. As you can see, your head can already hurt because I have so many of them, from 1 to 10, from 100 to 1000, and then maybe t-shirt sizes for some things, and then maybe let's go with semantic names for some things, maybe even introduce levels. I mean, it's crazy. So imagine that you have colors named like yellow 1, yellow 2, yellow 3, and then for shadows, you have from 100 to 500. And then for fonts, you have XS, S, M, L. And then for some other things, like for surfaces, you have level 1, 2, 3. So it will be really hard for newbies or for people that will just join your design system to understand what's the logic behind. You know, they are just using different logic. So yeah, please use this carefully and use one logic and go maybe for semantic just for border radius, but for all the rest, use either numeric sizes or ordinal. Why is that important? I created this slide here. So you can see that what users see is the top layer. That's the final layer. So you will just sign in your favorite app or the website. And as a user, you don't care what happens below that. They can use design tokens or Figma variables, or they can use styles, or maybe even type values manually in. You don't care about it. But as a client, I mean, as the company that produces this stuff, you will lose a lot of time if you do stuff manually. And the companies that use design tokens are much faster. They can optimize their workflow, and they can also save a lot of money and resources with that. And that's why it's important that all your layers from foundation on are connected and sync across, I mean, until the final layer. And now let's go quickly through the workflow that I will show you. So I will show you how to define foundations. So before you start with naming, you should know what are your components and where you want to go. Then the second step is, like I said, that you introduce different people and have a workshop with them. And the third one is to start documenting everything that you have. That means that you will just put the component that you have, so you can apply the design tokens afterwards. And then you will create a small subset of design tokens and components and try the workflow that you envision to be the perfect one. And that will be the MVP. You will launch this first version, get the feedback, and go back to the testing. And then, if you're lucky and if you need to, you will go to teaming and scaling. Okay, so let's go to some fun stuff. The workshop phase is the phase where you need to understand the current processes. So how do you currently work with your developers? For example, I'm more on design side, so I can talk more about this. How can I share my link from the component? Do we have the JSON file that's stored locally? Do we use the push and pull with the API? Are we using Token Studio? Are we using the native feature from Figma? I mean, we need to understand where are we currently and where we want to go. Then general alignment. That just simply means that we know where we want to go in 3, 6, and 9 months, and that we all agree about the tooling that we will use. For example, maybe we start with a simple MVP, and we just say, okay, let's try, for example, with Token Studio, but then later on we will move to something else. But for that small subset of tokens, we will try this one. Then I like to play the game name of the component. I will also share the template with you for Figma. And there's the workspace that you can just enter your names. But I mean, it might be funny, but try and test, put the components in, and you will see that people have different names for the same component. So yeah, it's important that you have and use the same names. Then naming structure versions. That simply means that you will play around with your names and see what works better. Is it like button, primary, background, or is it better primary button background, you know? So play with that, and then let everyone share their experience. So for example, if somebody worked on multi-brand design system before, or somebody worked as a design system of one, you know, let them share what they contribute and also what they learned. And like I said, choose tooling. So Sam already said that the names should be short, meaningful, scalable. That means that you can use it on more teams, flexible and clear. Don't use any jargon because nobody will understand. And some of the well-known approaches are CTI approach and BEM approach, where you can just simply use category, type, item, and then for BEM approach, block, element, modifier. And then we have all sorts of functional approach that are not so functional usually, like primary, background color, tab color, text hover, and then people use all sorts of structures because, I mean, structures, I don't mean that in real sarcastically, but yeah, you should start and put the structure on for you. And it helps if you don't have any experience that you just make up a story. So for example, I need the color for the button background for my base theme. And the button has the default role, and I need it in all states. So for example, it's active, it's hover, focus, and disabled. And now let's play with the naming stuff. So I have the playground here. You will be able to play with this in Figma and also on this website. I will share the direct link. But usually it's cool. For example, if you're just using one theme, you don't need this. But if you're using more, you can just add the names of your teams or brand or system or product, so that acts like a namespace. And then what kind of design tokens do you need? So I added the categories here. So color, font, space, size, border, and all the rest. And then the subcategory, it's connected with the category. For example, if I have a color, of course, I can color the background, I can color the text, I can color the border, but I cannot color the letter spacing. So some things will always exist in pairs. So I can move this color, okay, for the fill, etc., style, and so on. And then the third one is the component. I already shared that you will add this layer only if you need to go very specific. And of course, you can add your own components here. I just added some of them to share the experiment. And then which role has this design token? So again, some people don't add the default state, you know, or some people like to use base state, or some prefer to use primary or secondary or even tertiary. But the thing is, do your users of design system understand what's the difference between default and primary? So you should have a guideline where to use each name. Don't use everything like default, primary, secondary, etc. So make it logical. I added here more options just for you to have in mind what already exists there. And then how will we apply this token? Is what kind of state? Is it active? Is it hover? Is it focused? You know, disabled, pressed, visited? I mean, here are again a lot of options. And I advise you that you don't add more options that you currently use. For example, some people just like to ask, maybe in the future we will use this state, let's add it. No, don't do this because it will be really confusing and it will add more load for both designers and developers. And then the last one, again, it's really, I mean, it's optional because if you don't have a complex design system or the app, you don't need that. So you can define the surface. So let's say on dark, on light, raised, lower. Okay, we went through this and these are some basic examples. So if we would go just with two-layer approach, it would be color, text, default, or for example, color, background, info, and then color, icon, default. And then you would go with text and you would define the weight and again, default. But if you want to go more specific, You go with the color and you will define the text for the button in default version and in active state. As I said, you can play with this more in Figma because I want to show you the Airtable and how to play with it. But don't be scared to add the namespace before. You don't have to add it in Figma or Token Studio because this can be done automatically later on. So you would just use the names. But don't do this. I added just 2 examples that I saw. So for example, this example here had the sizing like size 100 to 600. And then they added another layer like space, padding, extra small, and then small, medium. And then they said, okay, let's add another layer, spacing, desktop, small. And what does this tell me? Nothing more than the layer before, you know? So don't add multiple layers because it feels good or maybe it's trendy. And also don't use exact values because then it's better that you just use the styles in Figma and that's it. And you just share it with your developers. These are not design tokens. Okay, so now let's go to the Airtable and let's find out how I usually approach this stuff. Okay, so Airtable offers you a lot of experiments. So I automated everything. So I will just share first the categories and then I will show you how everything's automated. So it's very helpful for me that once I have the app or I scan through components that I need, that I do everything in one database that I can also search through, because it will help me later on to find, let's say, the color for the button primary, and I won't have to scroll through JSON or anything else. So these tokens, the first one, it's automated. It will be automatically generated. I will show you how. And then it's the value, description, that's optional. And then I can share the theme. So for example, I will create a new token here so you will see how this works. For example, I have the base theme here. I can add the names. I just have to move the zoom sidebar. Okay, so I added the names before. You can do that by editing the field. And let's say that I choose the base theme. And for category, I will choose, for example, the color. And okay. And as you can see on the left side here for the tokens, the color was automatically added. And then the subcategory will be the color for border, you know. And I will choose the button because it will be the most easiest to imagine. The button, and then the role will be default and state, let's say, hover. And then the surface, it can be on light, just to have the presentation. Okay, so we have the color, border, button, default, hover, on light. And I can also define the status. So I can say, okay, this token is active, or I can choose this token is deprecated. Of course, I added this value so you can also choose or add different emojis so you will better understand. And I can define if this token is themable. Okay, let's say that it is. But what's cool about this approach is that I also added the list of components. So as you can see, I have the list of components ordered by alphabetically. And we just added the token for the button. And you can see that the color, border, button, default, hover, on light that we added was here. So it's automatically connected with the component that I added. I don't have to go back and forth to check if it's the right one because it automatically works. And once I'm in the component, I can paste the link for Figma. I can paste the link for my docs. And I can also set, okay, design is done, but I also need the web. I mean, it's in progress, or mobile, or you can also add iOS, Android, etc. And you can assign people. I will just assign me. But it works the other way around. You know, you could also do this by just applying the tokens here, because you can see the list automatically of all the tokens that were created. And what's the best thing about this is, maybe you didn't figure out yet, but I can apply the value. So let's say that the color border button is the neutral color. I mean, I'm deriving this from the foundations table, and I will just use the neutral 100. As you can see, the hex color was automatically added. So even if I change the color and I say, no, I will just use the cyan 300, I can see the value automatically here. And it works both ways. So if I go back to the cyan 300, you can see that the token was also automatically added here. So if you expand the list, you will see which tokens use this color. And this will help you later on if you, let's say, the change or split the design token into two, because you want to introduce the new one, you will quickly see which tokens are connected, and you don't have to be afraid of that. And why I like Airtable is also because you don't have to be technical or you don't have to know how to code. It's really easy and also visual for everyone to see what you already have. But what's also cool is that you can add the extension part, and this is the color palette, and you can expand it and you can see in a more visual way what are your foundations, and you can define how this extension shows you the colors. So are these names in RGB, hex colors? I mean, all this can be defined by you. And another one, which can be shared with all the stakeholders or people in your company, are the interfaces. So I created the interface from my table. I didn't have to do much. I just defined what to show me. And if I press the preview, you can see that all the tokens that I have are here. And if I search, for example, with the button, I can see which tokens are created for the button. I can see exact values for that. I could also add dark value colors or for dark theme or for another brand, but it's really easy because you have one interface for everything that you're using. And you can do the same for the components. You know, you can just press the preview and you have the whole list of components and all the applied tokens. But it's not the end yet. I have 3 automations. The first one is that if somebody changes the value, so for example, if I change the border color, I can push the update directly to GitHub, and it will automatically create the issue. So these are, I created some example pushes, and as you can see, there are a lot of issues open. So base color button info active secondary was updated by Rumina. And you can define what happens once the record is updated. So you can see what I have here, what kinds of values the Airtable needs to watch over. So list of tokens, and then in the grid view, and you can test the step afterwards. And this is the example. And then create an issue, and you can define everything. So please update the value of, and you have the tokens, you know, and you can add the example text or also tag the people so users could took the action, etc. You can also send the email, you know, and again, it's who to send the email and then design token, and you can define all the values here on the right side and also test it. And the third one, which is most popular, is that you can also send the Slack message or the Teams message and define each value that needs to be watched over and what it has to generate, you know. So design tokens in component was just updated and you exactly know. And yes, I know developers can also do the same. So if developers change this, change the value in their repository, I have the automation with Zapier. I can share more later on, but the thing is that I have the automation with Zapier that actually generates the GitHub issue from their side, and it shares automatically the link here, you know. So it's the message, the push that they did, and who did it, and then just the GitHub link where you can see what happened, you know, in which team was in which repo was updated. So yeah, there's a lot of options, and you can play with it afterwards. But once you do this, and once you have the database ready, you can start playing with versions. I have the setup, and this logic is useful for me, and I understand it perfectly, but maybe the structure doesn't work for you, and you can turn it, maybe duplicate the database, play with other automation tools, and Sam will share more about later, and then change the logic a bit and see what works for your team. So what we saw now is from MVP to launch. So we defined the foundations, we went through the workshop, we created the inventory, and we chose like the small set of design tokens for our MVP. And yeah, the tooling is still the question that depends on you and what you can use, how many resources you have. And then I really recommend that you test everything and you get the feedback from the team. How do they feel about using the naming structure and also the whole workflow? And if you're satisfied, push the launch, push the design tokens in the wild. And if you need, you can scale and do new themes. And by themes, it's not just visual, like having light and dark, but it's also having high contrast or maybe minimalistic, maybe having themes for different brands or for accessibility. So for colorblind people with less animations. And of course, we also need to think about VR and AR. And then later on, the last step, which we don't have time to talk about, is the automation. So how design tokens can actually help you to automate everything, to use linting, to see if everything works, and version control, and also how to help designers and developers with other API stuff and goodies. And for the last thing, I would just like to say that all this can be really simple. Can look really simple, but still you need to have someone in your team that's capable of sharing the knowledge to other designers or for newcomers. So please write your workflow so they can all understand what you're doing in your team and also understand the decisions that you made along the way. And yeah, my last words are: start small. Don't go like deep and too broad in the start. Don't forget to play, because design systems might seem so scary, but you can always ask people around or ask people on LinkedIn. You can always reach out, and I'm sure that this community is really helpful to share the knowledge. And I think it's also really important to make it so easy that you can just blend in, so designers will not feel whether you're using a complex structure or not, but everything will work like a charm. And yeah, you can get these templates for Airtable and Figma, and I will share the link in Miro immediately. But I'm not the smartest. Like Sam said, there are a lot of people that already did and go through all this stuff. So I read more links that you can read. There are a lot of blog posts, videos, etc., and also examples from the well-known design systems. And I also encourage you to read State of Design Tokens from Supernova. There are a lot of insightful things there, and you can download their report. So thank you for listening, and I hope you find out some really cool and useful stuff that you can use already tomorrow.
Amazing. Look at all those hearts in the chat. That is incredible. I'm sure you were not watching the chat, but I wanted you to know that you've been given a new name. Your semantic name is now Token Goddess, according to the chat.
Wow. Thanks for all the love.
I
now
love that.
We'll just turn off the camera.
All right, friends. So you can see why I wanted Romina to go through the beautiful, amazing designed iconography version of all of the different things that you can think about when you're creating your names. My approach is going to be a little bit more grassroots and a little bit different. If you don't know me yet, my name is Sam, and I'm currently working with Token Studio. So my approach while I hate designing tables, I actually love Airtable a lot. However, I cannot get my team to use Airtable at all. We use FigJam, we use Figma, and we use GitHub a lot. And so I'm going to share an approach that we used at Token Studio to come up with our naming templates. And we are in the process of publishing those templates out as case studies, as well as the research about why we're choosing these naming templates. So I'm going to share with you the FigJam file that I've created, as well as I'll give you a sneak peek as to what our collaboration session looked like. And then in the next week, I will publish this file out so you can take it, customize it, make it your own. And looking at what Romina has, there's a lot of great things in there for you to think about. What do I want this name to be? What makes sense to my team? And this FigJam file is a way for you could actually collaborate with your team to make these decisions and try them on and see how they feel. So give me a second to do the screen sharing. Oh, I have to steal Romina's screen share. It's okay, it was a good slide to end with. All right, I can see that we're seeing the FigJam, which is awesome. So this is what the template looks like. And I'm going to walk you through the template, and then I'm going to give you some tips on how you could use it. And then I'm going to show you what we did at Token Studio as a team. And then I'm going to show you a cool thing that I built to help get it out of Figma and FigJam into a name that you could then use in a spreadsheet or put it right into Token Studio or whatever you wanted to do. So up at the top here, I've got some context about what we just went through in the video, but it's helpful to refresh. Part one is about mapping out your design decisions, and then, documenting the collaboration piece. Then we get into the naming, and you'll see that I've broken them into the primitive options, which was the top part of that structure diagram, the middle part where we make some decisions, and the bottom part into components. And then on the sides here, I have these sections, which are banks of options that you might be able to take and use in your template. So you can take a sticky note from one of these banks and you can move them into your template and try some things on. Now, I can't take credit for this template. I collaborated with Luke on my team, who's a product designer and a developer, and Luke actually gave me the crash course on GitHub for Designers. I saw you guys in the chat asking about, hey, can we learn GitHub for Designers? I am not a GitHub pro by any means, but if you talk to your developers and you let them know, like, hey, I'm really trying here, they will take the time to teach you how to use it properly. And also Joran, who is the engineer who is building Style Dictionary. And it was great to work with them to figure out what do we really need and what do we not need and how do things work under the hood? Because I had a lot of ideas in my head that are not necessarily technically accurate or needed for most teams. Now, if it's working for you and what you have is great and you've agreed on something else, that's cool. You can still use this template and modify it to your needs, but I'm just sharing what we're using as an example. In this section, which I'll add more to once I have a chance to finish it off and publish it for you guys, is the resources that you can use to learn more about tokens or maybe to pass on to future people or get a refresh, as well as this little one here, which I'm going to demo at the end. Now, remember when I said that we want to understand the who, what, where, when, why, and how of our design decisions by making thoughtful names. Now, one problem that I see a lot when working with community members is we look at a token and we don't know where it lives in our token structure. Because if all your tokens are named in the exact same way, in the exact same template, when you're just looking at the token, you don't really know where to go. You don't really know how to troubleshoot. If you need to make a change, you're not sure where to go. So what if we had a slightly different naming template for each of the layers in our system? Maybe our primitive tokens start with exactly what they are, the color, blue, 500. Maybe in that middle part where we start to make some decisions, we start the name with where that decision lives or who it applies to. I want to know that this is a theme color if I'm a product designer mocking up a new whatever. Or if I'm mocking up a slide, maybe I want to look for a brand color. And if I front load the token with that information, I can easily find what I'm looking for. And as Romina already mentioned, we no longer have to front load our tokens with system code, because when they do that transformation stage between design and code, engineers can add that there. So we can save that namespace that gets truncated anyway and makes designers' lives a lot more difficult and add it later. Now, what if you have a really complex structure? Your token pathway might look something like this, but still I have this component specific token. And then if I look at the value, it's referencing my theme colors. Cool, I know to go look at my theme colors. And now I'm at my theme colors, and this one is referencing my device colors. Okay, maybe I have a different color palette for Android versus iOS. I'm gonna go there. And now I'm seeing that this is coming from brand colors. All right, my brand color looks different one place or another. That would be weird, but that's what's happening in this system. All right, that's cool. It's a decision I had to make. I'm gonna live with it. In my brand colors, maybe I have 3 brands, maybe I have 10 brands. I don't know. It doesn't matter. I have a whole bunch here. And then this finally is coming from my primitives. So this idea of having a slightly different template based on where they live in your token structure will actually help us figure out a little bit more of this who, what, where, when, why, and how than if all the tokens, no matter where they lived, are named in the exact same way. Now, as a pro tip for you guys, these are actually editable. So if you wanted to take this and drill in and change the text and try to like map things out that way, feel free. So part 1 of the workshop, if you're going to do this with your team, and I have these yellow notes up here, or the orange ones rather, are notes, like instructions that I'm going to explain to you. So if you were doing this async or you want to pass this file along to somebody else, go for it. And the idea is to think about a component. And as Romina said, tell yourself a story. So I want you to remember that when you think about a component, all components essentially have the same atomic parts. They have a container, whether you can see it or not, it's there. They usually have a label or not, and they usually have some sort of asset or not. So basically, components all consist of these 3 atomic parts. Maybe there are more of them, but it's these 3 things. And think about this component when you're working on this map, because if I say to myself, I have this component here that I'm working on, maybe it's a button or a card or whatever it is. I have some decisions that I'm going to make. And that's what's going to be applied here. And those are going to come from my primitives. And maybe there are some things in my system that never change. So for example, if I know that no matter where in my system, no matter how complex it is, my buttons are always fully rounded, I could put that in this gray box up here. But maybe I have a light and dark theme. So I would maybe name this one, I don't know, mode colors. And maybe I have some brands. So I'm going to have my brand colors, something like this. And on this side, I have, I don't know, a density theme. And maybe that's coming from the platform that I'm working on. This is where everyone gets to see all my terrible typos, but that's okay. And in this version of the template, I don't need these anymore. Cool. Now I'm going to literally start to map out the flow of information. So as a product designer working with this button, I want to flip between light and dark. That changes based on the brand. So in this very simple example, the flow of information kind of looks like this. And I'm going to start to connect these. I get it. And I would do the same over here, of course. And you would connect those and you would draw your little map. Now, if your map kind of looks like this idea of a column, something super simple, you probably don't need component-specific tokens at this time. You're probably going to be okay to deal with your decision tokens, your semantic tokens, work with those for a while, and it's going to be fine. Now, if your map starts to look something like this, the wider the triangle or the more crazy of a geometric shape your map looks like, that is a good test that you probably want to think about component-specific tokens, because it's going to help to simplify for the machines and the engineers exactly what information is there. And it's also going to reduce the risk that I ever have to take that token off and replace it with something else. So step 1 is we mapped out our design decisions. And if you do this and you're like, oh no, I messed it up, or I invited another person and we need another one, I made an extra version of the map here. So you can just open that up, duplicate it, do what you want. And this section over here is this idea of collaborating with your team. Now, in my experience, this idea of mapping out the flow of information, and I'll show you what we did on our team, it when you collaborate with a lot of people, the maps look crazy. So you might do the map with your team and then you come back and you clean it up with yourself. And as you're having these conversations, you're going to start to realize that you're making a lot of decisions about how you want your naming structure to be. And I've just written some notes here of some things that you might want to think about, questions you might want to ask in your collaboration or when you have a coffee chat with someone else on your team. Things that Romina mentioned, like, hey, what are you going to call these things? Is it the in progress state or is it the loading state, for example? Whatever you decide on your team, just make sure you all agree and you find some way to document it. And Romina is using Airtable, which is fantastic to document it and to get it pushed into GitHub. But I could not get my team to use Airtable to document tokens. It's just not going to happen. So instead, I've actually started to document the way that we've decided on naming things in Token Studio. So I use another token and I'm writing notes on this namespace. We're not going to add that here, add it in transformation stage as needed. So you can figure out different ways to document your tokens based on where people are actually going to look for them. And now we get into this idea of actually doing the naming. So when you see these boxes here of the templates, these are the templates that we're using at Token Studio. Now, if you've looked at something like Romina's resource or one of the other amazing articles that awesome people have written and you've agreed on something else, just modify the template. And what you want to do is you want to go through here and you want to look at the template and go, okay, what are the things that I'm putting in each spot of my name? And am I using a dot or a dash? Now, if you're working in Token Studio or you're following that DTCG spec, the dots actually allow us to make some grouping, which we have some workflow superpowers in tools like Token Studio with the groups. If your team doesn't like them, that's fine. Just edit the template to have a dot or a dash. And if for some reason you're using this template for variables only, you could change these with a slash. Would be okay. And then you start to map out this idea of, remember, we're thinking about a component here. So up at the top, my color primitives, we decided that we're going to start them all with exactly what they are, and then which group they belong to, and the exact option. So that scale at the primitive level for colors, we decided on 100 to whatever it ends up being. And with the idea of dimensions, it's the same thing. It's the exact same template. What property, what group, the exact option. It's just some different names. And again, these are templates that you can take and use. I've given you a ton of examples. For typography, we don't really have this group here. We just have the name of what it is and the exact option. Now, primitives are interesting because if you are working on a team that has decided, listen, I would really love for those primitives to be specific to the platform that we're using or the programming language that we're using or whatever it is, maybe you want to name your primitives in that way. Now, this is an example from Tailwind CSS. And if you look at something like text decoration, for example, a platform agnostic way might be to say text decoration, and maybe your engineering team has asked you to please write it with a particular use of capital letters, or this is camel case, or camel case. But in Tailwind, they said, hey, I would love this all to be using this exact word with these dashes in it. So, you can have whatever version it is that you need and then move them over. When we get to the decision tokens, the template, remember, is a little different. So in this case, it's who is the decision for? Okay, is it my brand color or is it my theme color? And where in the system is it? Is it my primary brand color or my secondary brand color? Are we talking about where in your layers it is, the design, the location in your design, and the condition? Romina called it something a little different. It's the same thing. Is it default? Is it hover? Are you even defining those things at this stage, or is that component only? And all of this is okay. This is just a template that you can modify to kind of document your team decisions. Dimension tokens look something similar, but a little bit different. And typography decisions, also similar, but a little bit different. But at the end of the day, they follow the exact same template. And the interesting thing about agreeing on a template is that your engineers can start to write automations based on these templates. Talking to Joran, who works on Style Dictionary, he said, I know that if the token starts with the name of a property in plural, that it's a primitive token, I easily know where to go and find a hard-coded value. It's easy for me. I know that if the name starts with the component exactly, or a category of a component, that it's a component token. I know that. And anything else I know is one of your semantic decision tokens. Like that is pretty easy to understand for them on that side. Now, these spaces here I've added is when you start to make your decisions about what you're going to call these things. So for example, is it loading or is it in progress? You can start to add those here in the template so that you know as you go and build these out, you can add them into the template as you needed. Component specific tokens are very specific to components. And remember, not all teams need them. It's okay if you don't want to go there. It's totally okay. One of the things I want to call out when I was doing this research on how things actually worked under the hood is I had this misconception that if you were going to the level of component specific tokens, that every single part of every single component needed a unique token. And if your team wants that, that's fine, but it's not a technical requirement, right? So for example, in the container layer, if I know that all of my CTA buttons are always going to have the same gap, padding, minimum height, minimum width, shadow, radius, whatever it is, if I know they're all going to share it, and it doesn't matter what color theme, color mode, or brand color we're using, whatever it is, then they can share these tokens. You can apply this action CTA button gap token to many different buttons as long as the label still applies. And that idea of what do I name my component? Again, you would have this here and you would add it to your template. Now, this is the hardest thing that I had to figure out. That back end of a token name, BG color, border color, whatever, I don't code. I don't know CSS that well. And so I collaborated with my engineers. And remember, I talked about a component really has these three pieces to it, right? It has a container, whether maybe you see it, maybe you don't. You have a text element and you have an attribute or an icon or an asset or whatever it is that you maybe put in there for some visual context. These are all of the things that you could use for each of those properties. So container background color, there's one option here. Border, there's one option here. If you're doing independent borders, here are your options. And I wrote some notes here about things that you can modify as you go. So once you get your hands on this file, if you want to use it, you can go through and take a look. You can chat with your team, or you can figure out what you want to have here, and you can have this as the template that you can always use moving forward. So the idea with this is you can take this and you can drag it, drop it over into Figma. Okay, I'm working on a new component or a pattern. I want to drag these pieces over and I want to create a template for it. And what you see in this FigJam file is the actual template that I use to name the button tokens and the semantic decisions that are going into the design system that Token Studio is working on that we're going to be open sourcing to the community, which is pretty cool. Now, I mentioned that I would show you what we did on our team. Now, you have to remember that I have some people on my team who are very technical and thinking about things like surface logic, contextual awareness, and how do we scale it into things like having a future where we can support accessibility, multiple languages, user preferences, new tools, new platforms, a new website, all of this stuff. And we all got together and I said, okay, let's each take a duplicate of this map template here and let's write all the things on it that we think are in the system that would need to be a theme now or in the future. It was complex. And then we took them all and we combined them into something that ended up looking a little bit like this. And then we took it and we refined it down to something that ended up looking a little bit like this. And when I say refined, it got more and more complex. And now we've scaled that back even further and we've started with our MVP approach. So what we've actually started with is just what touches the buttons, and then it's going to go up to primitives. And then as we grow in team and complexity, we'll start to add these other things. And what was really fascinating for me is chatting with the people who are really into this idea of contextual awareness and surface logic. And like I always thought, okay, a lighter dark theme is going to sit at the bottom because it's the thing as a product designer, I might go in and switch. But actually that's a user setting, so that should go at the top. So in chatting with the people who are building the system under the hood, I let them make the decisions that are going to help us drive the tokens because, again, this system is to be in collaboration with them. And then we can take the things that are sitting here and we've decided that anything touching a component on this idea of elevation, interaction, appearance. These are going to be colors as well as typography. We decided typography is going to be its own token set. So these ones are going to start with typography, whatever. And then surface. So, elevation, interaction, whatever, maybe some colors, anything that's on that surface, because you want to have surface logic. Those tokens are all going to start with surface, whatever. And appearance, same thing. And then on the dimension side of things, we're going to start with density and then expand out to this later idea of viewport and kind of go from there. But as long as I don't have to change or remove any of the tokens that are touching the components, we are free to grow and change and swap what's happening above. So the hope is that we can build these components one time and then not have to build them again until they need to be refactored because something cool happens. And we can just change the tokens that are feeding in the values into the components. Now, okay, it's a FigJam file. Cool, Sam. I've got this in FigJam. That's awesome. But have you ever tried to copy a whole bunch of these sticky notes and put them into a spreadsheet or something? Sometimes they paste well, sometimes they don't. They also don't, they might have a page break in them or whatever. And so I went down a little bit of a GPT rabbit hole. And I built something that I am going to share with y'all. So I'm just going to stop sharing so I can switch my screen in a second. But first, I'm just going to copy a bunch of these token names first. Stop sharing. Start sharing. All right. So now you're looking at the website, which is maybe not what we want to see. What you want to see is GPT. And I have built a custom GPT that I am training with the DesignTokens community group spec, as well as the research that we've done on naming as a team, as well as the templates that we've built. And now I can just paste this into here with its terrible formatting, and it knows to start to tidy up my token names. And I've asked it to please, pretty please put this into a table for me in the back end. So if you use the FigJam file, and I've linked to it, you're going to have access to this thing. If you have access to GPT and you can access custom GPTs, you just click the link and you can paste it. So this is pretty cool. And it's still a work in progress, but you can ask it now questions like, hey, maybe I want to have more of different states or whatever it is, and it will just mass produce your tokens for you. Now, the other cool thing that I did with it was because I trained it on the spec and the things that you can and cannot have in a name without it breaking in code is I'm just going to copy. I'm in FigJam right now. I know you can't see me because I'm sharing my other screen, but I'm here. And I've just grabbed some poorly made token names. They have errors in them according to the spec. So you can see here, I've got $signs. That symbol is reserved for something special in code. I have curly brackets, which is reserved for something special in code. So I've done all this stuff, right? These are error-ridden token names. And I'm going to hit enter and, oh, hey, it cleaned my token names and now it's formatting them for me. What? It fixed all my errors. Hey, can you tell me what was wrong? Now, I'm not a prompt expert by any capacity. I need to rewatch that talk to learn some stuff. But if you made a mistake and you ask it, it should be able to tell you, and I will continue to make this thing better and smarter and stronger as I continue to write and publish more research in this space. You can see here, it's telling me what's wrong. So you can actually put your tokens in here, it will clean it out and give it to you in this nice sort of table that you could pass it back to. The other thing that you might be able to do is if you've changed your template, you could say to it, hey, I know you've been trained on this, but my template is that. Can you hang on to this information? Cool. Okay. Here's my tokens, please tidy them, and it should perform to do the same thing. Now, again, this is a work in progress. GPT just updated. There's a whole bunch of unknowns there, but I've tried to build something cool to make my life and your lives much easier. So I think now we're ready to take a look at the Miro board and answer some questions between Romina and I. Romina, are you with me?
Yes, I shared. I'm back.
Romina's back.
So I already answered some questions, but yeah, we can go through probably the ones that are with stars. Justin shared
Okay, let's go
the
take a
most
look.
interest.
This is why they gave us a lot of time, friends, because we're hosting ourselves and screen sharing, trying to find
Maybe
Miro
we
boards.
can start with the simple ones.
Yeah, let's do it.
So I was just reading, at which level should we implement modes? Should it be at the semantic level or the component level? So probably you are talking about Figma variables. So in this case, it's better. I mean, you can have one file where you can have primitive variables and then semantic variables in like the second collection, but it's better and more safe for you if you make any mistake that you create two libraries. So the first one is primitive, and then the second one actually takes the values from the primitive, and you have all the semantic naming there. And then for each component, it's good that you create new file. But it depends how extensive and complex your design system is. But again, if you have each component in your own file, it provides some kind of security for you that if you accidentally update anything, that you will not lose or change your app.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say the only time that it would make sense to have double component specific tokens for each theme is if that's a requirement from your engineering team. So if you were having engineers writing for a native Android and iOS app and they have a specific way of writing those tokens in a specific theme, then I think that, yeah, you would have to do it at the component level. But usually there's a way also that with transformation and being smart in the way that they do the code side of things that you can avoid that. But that would be about the only time that I would say it makes sense to double the number of component tokens. Really, ever we want to keep, there's already a lot. Like I did one button in one state and it ends up being like a lot of tokens.
Yeah, so the second question is, what advice do you have for just starting to implement tokens into your design system? So this is quite broad. I mean, I think you should go, choosing the small subset. And like I shared, I mean, that would be my advice, to really try and test the workflow that you have, because there are a lot of options you saw from Sam and me. You can use different plugins, you can use Token Studio, you can use Figma variables. And it just depends how skilled you are, or if you have somebody that will help you implement this, or do you already know this stuff? What would be your advice, Sam?
I would say if you've never worked with tokens at all in your entire life, maybe work with variables for a little bit and see how you feel about that. And because a lot of the concepts are the same and they apply, and then you're ready to move into tokens and you kind of have an idea about what you need and where you need to go. For me, if I'm doing exploration or ideation, so for example, when I was working on those slides have a gradient in the background. I wasn't sure what I was going to like about them. I could add a token to each of the parts of that mesh gradient and map it back to a primitive color. And then I can duplicate that out with some different values and see what I liked. So you can use tokens in an exploration stage for something that is not essential to your component library or business as usual to test out how they work. And I think that's like a fun and safe space to get started for the first time.
Yeah, and I would also say, if you are not, if you're a startup and you're just finding your product market fit, don't lose time with this. It's better to focus on business first and then go in the design tokens. Of course, it will help you save the time, but if you're not comfortable doing that, it might cause you some headaches. And I would also advise to start with Figma variables, because you can quickly see what changes and you can use different frames for different modes. Okay, so the next question: any recommendations for publishing documentation for tokens in the design system for users? Yeah, mine is Airtable. I mean, it's the starting point. Of course, you can also use Storybook. You can also use You can have the JSON file and you can parse it in CSV file and put it in Google spreadsheet. I mean, there's so many options, even if you're just starting out and you're searching for some tool that's free. Otherwise, you can use, when you push the JSON to GitHub, you have everything there. So
yeah, on my side, I mean, if you want a snapshot in time of the tokens that are on a component, a tool like 8shape specs is where it's at, quite honestly. If you want to document your tokens, I have a guide online and I will add it to the Miro to create something that I have called living documentation. So Token Studio has a feature called documentation tokens, and it allows you to create documentation that's mapped to your token so that if the values change, you update the documentation and it updates the tokens with it. So you have these documentation of what your tokens are and what their values are, and they stay alive. So as your tokens change, you can run them and map them. So that's another option as well.
how do you manage creating a vast amount of component-specific color tokens and the token load that might start affecting the file load? I'm not sure if this is the question for Token Studio or like Figma.
So when you have a lot of tokens in a file, whether it's on the Figma side or Token Studio side, we're talking about like attaching you can think about it like a literal token. If I was looking at this microphone, I would like attach a token to the thing. And then anytime you make an update, you've got to run it and it has to scan and find all the tokens and say, hey, what's the name and for the ID of that decision, and then update the value. So yes, if you have a lot of tokens in one file, it's going to be a heavy load for sure. What I typically do is I separate the components on different pages. So then at least I can run those tools on a per page level. What's even better is if you can just update on a per component level. So you can just select it and run it as selection instead of running it through the whole document or the whole page. When you add living documentation tokens, of course, you're then adding again more tokens to the same file and more things to scan. And so you could have those in a different file, you could have them on different pages, and you can have a different process in order to do that. Figma on the variable side of things has their own challenges with performance when you have a lot of variables and you need to delete them and all sorts of things. And so they also recommend that you split these up between different files so that you have a little bit less load on anything. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think we can finish with this question. We will try and go through every question that we have on Miro board, and you can already find my link there, and Sam will share her link. Thank you for tuning in, DesignTokens, and as we said in the beginning, it's very easy.
I love that. Thank you for being an awesome co-collaborator in this workshop. I had such a great time bouncing ideas off of you. What a lot of people don't know is we did not collaborate on the content ahead of time, and yet we still somehow ended up with very complementary and similar concepts. So two different people working in two different worlds with different clients and concepts and still kind of arriving at the same thing after being, living in token land for as long as we have. So hopefully
high five to another room.
I'll high five you. Oh, I got to do it the other way because we're married. Yeah. So it was nice to hang out with you, Romina. We're all going to take a short break at the top of the hour. For the people who it's going to be a top of the hour, that's when we're back. If you're on a time zone at a half hour, then we'll be back at the half hour, but it's like 7 minutes from now. So we'll be back very shortly, and Andressa will be back to introduce the next presentation. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.